The lawyer for the Homeowners Association was a man made of pure, unadulterated smugness. He paced in front of the judge's bench, his voice dripping with a kind of theatrical outrage that he had clearly practiced in front of a mirror. He gestured dramatically towards me, where I sat at the defendant's table. "This man," he declared, his voice echoing in the silent wood-paneled courtroom, "this vandal took a wrecking ball, Your Honor, a wrecking ball, to our beautiful, brand-new $1 million community lodge. He reduced it to a pile of rubble. And for this act of wanton, malicious destruction, we are asking for $2 million in damages. $1 million to rebuild what he destroyed, and another $1 million in punitive damages to teach him a lesson he will never forget." He sat down, a look of profound satisfaction on his face. The judge looked at me over the top of his spectacles. Grim, disapproving expression on his face. It was bad. Oh, it looked very, very bad. My own lawyer, a quiet, methodical man named Peterson, slowly rose to his feet. "Your Honor," he began, his voice calm and even, "my client does not deny that he hired a demolition crew to remove the structure in question." A triumphant sneer flickered across the HOA lawyer's face. He had his confession. However, Peterson continued, his voice dropping slightly. "Becoming a tool of surgical precision, we do have one small legal point of contention." He turned to look at the HOA's lawyer. "It's a fundamental principle of property law, you see. You cannot vandalize a building that never legally existed. What my client did, Your Honor, was not an act of vandalism. It was the legally permitted, court-sanctioned and long overdue removal of an illegal multi-ton trespass from his own private property." The sneer on the other lawyer's face froze, then shattered. The judge leaned forward, his eyes now wide with a sudden, intense interest. And that's when everything went wrong. Before I tell you what happened next, drop a comment. What would you do if this happened to you? And subscribe to HOA Files. To understand that moment, that beautiful legalistic detonation in a quiet courtroom, you have to understand the land and the silence I had come to cherish. My name is Alex. I'm a geologist. My life has been spent in the wild, remote, and quiet places of the world, studying the slow, powerful, and patient language of the rocks. I understand time in a way that most people don't. I understand that what is on the surface is often just a thin, fragile veneer over a much deeper, much older truth. My grandfather was a man who understood this too. He was a rugged old school prospector who, in his youth, had made a small fortune. But he didn't spend his money on flashy cars or big houses. He spent it on land. He bought 500 acres of pristine, untouched, and ruggedly beautiful mountain wilderness. A place of soaring peaks, of deep, silent forests, of a single, magnificent plateau with a view that could make you believe in God. He left it. To me, when he passed, his only heir. It was a sacred trust. I lived several states away. My work kept me busy. But I made a pilgrimage to my mountain, my inheritance, a few times a year. I would hike its trails, camp on its peaks, feel a sense of peace that I couldn't find anywhere else on earth. The problem was that the world had begun to encroach on my wilderness. A few years ago, a massive, ultra-exclusive, and aggressively manicured development called Summit Creek had been built in the valley below my land. It was a gated community of multi-million-dollar homes, a place that seemed to be actively at war with the very nature that surrounded it. My first and only interaction with the community, before the war began, was a simple, courteous phone call. I was planning some geological survey work on my property, which involved some loud but necessary seismic testing. As a courtesy, I called the HOA president, a woman named Brenda, to give her a heads up. Her response was a perfect preview of the arrogant ignorance I was about to face. "I don't know who you are," she'd snapped, her voice dripping with condescension. "But this is a private, peaceful community. We will not have you tapping on your rocks and disturbing our residents. You will stay on your side of the fence and you will be quiet. Is that understood?" I tried to explain that. My land was vast, that the work was miles away from her homes, and that I wasn't even sure where her fence was. She just hung up on me, and that was the last I heard from them. It's for 2 years. I continued my quiet, solitary visits to my mountain, completely unaware of the conspiracy that was brewing in the valley below. And then came the discovery. I arrived for my annual summer trip, a week of planned hiking and camping. I parked my truck at the base of the old logging road that served as my entrance and began the long, beautiful hike up to my favorite spot, the high plateau with the panoramic view. But as I broke through the tree line, the beautiful, familiar view was gone. In its place was a scene so shocking, so utterly and profoundly wrong, that my mind refused to process it for a long, silent moment. There was a house, not a small cabin, massive, brand new, and very expensive-looking mountain lodge style. Clubhouse. It was a sprawling structure of glass and stone and timber, with a huge wraparound deck, manicured landscaping, and a large, professionally carved wooden sign that read, "The Summit Creek Community Lodge, private property, members only." I just stood there, my backpack slipping from my numb fingers, my heart a cold, dead stone in my chest. The range of emotions that washed over me was a tidal wave. First, a deep, disorienting confusion. Was I lost? Had I taken a wrong turn? Then, a dawning, sickening realization as I checked the GPS on my phone. No, I was not lost. I was standing on the exact coordinates of my own private, legally deeded land. And then came the final, overwhelming emotion, a cold, quiet, and absolutely pure rage. They had not just trespassed on my land. They had invaded it. They had occupied it. They had built a monument to their own arrogance right in the very heart of it. I didn't storm down the mountain. I didn't scream. My rage was a geologist's rage. It's cold, patient, and focused on the bedrock of the problem. That afternoon, I went to the next monthly HOA meeting. I walked into their opulent clubhouse, a different one. The one in their main development, quiet, unassuming man in hiking boots, holding a simple, rolled-up map. The room was full of wealthy, self-satisfied looking people. And at the head of it all was Brenda, in her element. I waited until the public comment period. I introduced myself. "My name is Alex," I said, my voice calm and even. "I am the owner of the 500-acre parcel of land that borders your community to the north." Brenda looked at me, a flicker of annoyed recognition in her eyes. "Yes," she said, her tone dismissive. "What is your issue?" "My issue," I said, as I walked to the front of the room and unrolled my official, notarized county survey map, "is that you have illegally constructed a $1 million building squarely in the middle of my private property." A confused murmur went through the room. Brenda just laughed, a short, barking, condescending sound. "Oh, that's absurd. You're mistaken. The new community lodge is on HOA common land. We have the survey maps to prove it." She had her lawyer, who was of course in attendance, project their own map on the screen. It was a new, slick, digitally rendered map, and it showed a neat, straight property line that conveniently placed the new lodge just inside their own territory. "As you can see," she said with a smug, pitying smile, "this is our land. This is our new clubhouse. And you," she said, her voice turning to steel, "need to leave. You are trespassing at this meeting." I had expected this. I had known they would have their own, convenient version of the truth. "Your map is a very lovely work of fiction, Brenda," I said. "My map, the one that has been on file with the county since 1952, is the legally binding reality. Suggest you consult a competent surveyor. And I am formally putting you and this entire board on notice. You have illegally developed my land. I am giving you 90 days to remove your structure." The war had been declared. I hired my own lawyer, and I hired a new, independent, and highly respected survey crew. Their findings, of course, confirmed what I already knew. The original 1952 boundary line was the correct one. The HOA's map was a fraud. Convenient fiction they had likely paid a Catrate surveyor to draw up for them. We sent a formal legal notice to the HOA via certified mail. It contained the new, independent survey report. It contained a copy of my original legally filed deed, and it contained a simple, non-negotiable demand. You have 90 days to remove your illegal structure from my private property. or I will take further legal action. I thought that would be it. They were caught. They were cornered. No sane person, no rational board of directors would be stupid enough to ignore a formal, legally backed demand like this. But I was dealing with Brenda. Brenda was neither sane nor rational. Their response was a masterpiece of arrogant, self-destructive delusion. They countersued. They filed a lawsuit against me to quiet title, using their own fraudulent map as their primary piece of evidence. They were not just ignoring the truth. They were trying to legally erase it. They were trying to steal my land through the court system. The legal battle dragged on for a year. It was a slow, grinding, and incredibly expensive war of attrition. They used the HOA's vast financial resources to file motion after motion, to delay, to obstruct, to try and bleed me dry. I was a patient man. I was a geologist. I understood the slow, powerful pressure of time, and finally, we won. The judge, a no-nonsense woman who had clearly seen her share of HOA shenanigans, ruled unequivocally in my favor. She affirmed my original 1952 property lines. She declared the HOA's survey to be invalid, and she dismissed their lawsuit with prejudice. The judgment was clear and absolute. The land was mine. The clubhouse was an illegal trespass. And the judge's final order gave the HOA 60 days to remove the structure. I felt a massive, profound wave of relief. It was over. I had one. The truth, the bedrock truth of the old maps, had prevailed. But Brenda was not done. The 60-day deadline passed. The clubhouse was still there. I sent another legal notice. Their lawyer responded with a letter full of delays, of excuses, of bureaucratic nonsense. They were appealing. They were commissioning another study. They were waiting for a permit. It was a string of obvious, transparent lies. They were refusing to comply with a direct court order. And in that moment, I felt a new kind of despair. I had won in court, had the full weight of the law on my side. And yet I was still powerless. They had their clubhouse. It was still on my land. And they were, with their arrogant defiance, daring me to do something about it. It felt like, even in victory, I had lost. But my rage, which had been a slow, grinding thing for over a year, had now cooled and hardened into a diamond-like resolve. The law had told them to remove their trespass. They had refused. So I would. Follow the law to its next and final logical step. I would remove it for them. I didn't hire some back-alley crew. I did everything by the book, with the meticulous precision of a geologist mapping a fault line. I hired a professional, licensed, and fully bonded demolition company. I went to the county and, using the judge's court order as my justification, I obtained all the necessary permits for the demolition of an unsafe, illegal structure. And as a final, beautiful touch, I called the county sheriff's office. Informed the sheriff of my plans, provided him with the court order and my demolition permits, and I formally requested a civil standby to ensure that the HOA and its representatives did not, in any way, interfere with the legal and court-ordered execution of my property rights. And so, on a bright, clear Monday morning, I arrived at the base of my mountain. I was not alone. I was accompanied by a convoy, a massive yellow excavator on a flatbed truck, 2 huge empty dump trucks, and a very official-looking county sheriff's patrol car. We drove up the mountain, up to the scenic plateau. Brenda and a handful of other residents were already there. They had clearly been alerted to our arrival. They stood in front of the clubhouse, a human barricade, their faces a mixture of fury and disbelief. Brenda marched forward as the excavator rumbled to a stop. "You can't do this," she shrieked. "This is our property. We're appealing." The sheriff's deputy, a man who now had a very clear and legally defined job to do, stepped out of his car. He held up a copy of the judge's order. "Ma'am," he said, his voice calm and firm, "the court has ruled. This is not your property. And this gentleman has a legal permit to remove this structure. If you or any of these other residents interfere in any way, you will be arrested for contempt of court. Now I suggest you all move back to a safe distance." The look on Brenda's face, as her human shield dissolved, as her neighbors faced, with the threat of immediate arrest, scurried back to the edge of the property line, was a thing of pure, impotent rage. I then turned to the demolition crew foreman. I gave him a simple, quiet nod. You can begin. The excavator's massive. Hydraulic arm reached out, its steel bucket gleaming in the morning sun. And the first, beautiful, satisfying bite it took was out of the massive, panoramic, floor-to-ceiling glass window of the great room, the window that Brenda had so often bragged had the best view in the state. I stood there for the next 8 hours, and I watched. I watched as the symbol of their arrogance, of their greed, of their theft, was reduced, piece by piece, to a pile of splintered wood, of shattered glass, of twisted metal. By the end of the day, it was gone. Plateau was wounded. It was scarred, but it was mine again. And that brings us back to that courtroom. The courtroom where Brenda and the HOA, in a final, suicidal act of pure, unadulterated arrogance, were now suing me for destroying their building. My lawyer, Peterson, finished his statement. The one about the illegal trespass. The one about the truth. The judge looked at the HOA's lawyer, whose face was now the color of old parchment. Counselor, the judge said, his voice dripping with an icy disapproval. Is what Mr. Peterson just stated true? Did my previous order in this matter clearly establish that his client was the legal owner of this land? And did I order your client to remove the structure? The lawyer just stammered. Well, yes, Your Honor, but we were appealing. You were in contempt of a court order, the judge snapped. And now you are wasting this court's time with a frivolous, malicious, and frankly insane lawsuit. He banged his gavel, a sound like a gunshot in the silent room. Your lawsuit is dismissed with extreme prejudice. And I am awarding the defendant, he said, looking at me, a full and complete summary judgment on his counterclaim. The plaintiff, the Summit Creek HOA, will pay for all of Mr. Alexander's legal fees for the full cost of the demolition. In the removal of the debris, in an additional $500,000 in punitive damages for their bad faith, malicious prosecution, and their willful contempt of this court. He wasn't done. And furthermore, he said, his eyes now fixed on a nosobbing Brenda, I am referring this entire matter, including the evidence of the fraudulent survey map and the pattern of harassment, to the district attorney's office for a full criminal investigation into the board of directors for conspiracy, fraud, and perjury. The HOA was not just defeated, was financially and morally bankrupt. Brenda was not just a pariah. She was now facing the very real possibility of going to jail. The residents of Summit Creek, now facing a catastrophic special assessment too, pay the massive judgment to me and to fund the legal defense of their corrupt former board. We're in open rebellion. This whole brutal, ugly, and ultimately triumphant war taught me a profound lesson that my grandfather had tried to teach me long ago. The truth of the land, the truth of the bedrock, is patient. But it is absolute. People like Brenda can build their fancy, fragile houses of lies on the surface. They can draw their own convenient maps, but they can't change the foundation. They can't change the truth. She was so obsessed with what she wanted my land to be that she never bothered to respect what it actually truly and legally was. And in the end, that old, quiet, and stubborn truth rose up incompletely and beautifully. Demolished her world, the Summit Creek HOA has declared bankruptcy and is now in court-ordered receivership. But Brenda, as part of her own personal bankruptcy filing, has teamed up with a radical anti-government sovereign citizen group, and they have now filed a new federal lawsuit challenging the original 1889 land grant for my property, claiming it was an illegal treaty with a native tribe and that the entire mountain should be returned to the people.